North America is offline in CS2, and I'm not just talking about NA esports. The entire player base of NA has been in decline, and I'm not just talking recently. I'm talking as far back as the CSGO era. Joining a matchmaking game sometimes took up to 10 minutes in queue. Nowadays, trying to join any non-competitive game mode results in a solipsist nightmare. NACS content creators are basically all gone with the exception of a few people, and I think I'm the only person I know IRL who still plays CounterStrike. And I admit, I play Valorant almost as often as I do CS nowadays, because if everybody I know is playing other games, I do not want to solo queue CounterStrike. But it wasn't always this way.
Like I'm playing with a coach! A manager!
How have they done that? They came back all the way!
Bro, who cares? None of them died yet! I'm the rookie! I'm the rookie!
It's clear that CounterStrike is no longer the same cultural force that it was back in 2015, but I'd like it to be. So, how did we get to this point, and how do we rebuild? Well, in order to answer these questions, we need to begin with an autopsy on NACS's rotting corpse. So in this video, we're gonna take a look at the last time CS peaked in NA, and find out the cultural reasons why North America failed to survive as long as European CS. We'll also look at how Corpos gutted the scene and left it bleeding, and stick around for after when we'll talk about how NACS can rebuild. I'm Farivar, this is Dupe CounterStrike, Volvo please fix. So, since CS's fall from grace, two games have captured the North American zeitgeist. The first of which is Valorant, which excels in capturing two particular demographics in women and Asian Americans, both easily being brought in from League. Valorant definitely excels at maintaining ownership of these demographics. Strong moderation and cozy aesthetics make it a safe place for women to enjoy gaming in peace, and straight, unadulterated, near racist level of focus grouping worked on Asian Americans. I mean, I know, I'm part Asian and I was on board the second I saw those boba charms. Oh boy, I cannot wait to get swayed by the sheer amount of pandering this game does to me. I'm like a moth to a flame, bro. Let me get that Jujutsu Kaisen Toyota GT86 Keshi Uniqlo Arism t-shirt Millennium collab. But here's the thing, I often hear people say that Counter-Strike is bleeding players towards Valorant, and while that's true enough, I don't think that's the whole story, because with the direction Valorant is going in, favoring abilities and chaos over raw measurements of player skill, I don't think it's going to continue competing with CS for very long. I predict that players who wanted a polished Counter-Strike experience are going to decide to return to CS. I'd say at this point Overwatch is at risk of losing players to Valorant, but at this point with Marvel Rivals being out, I'm not sure Overwatch has any players left. Oh, and speaking of getting more users, this is the last call for our closed beta giveaway as we are almost in open beta, so make sure you enter at dupe.fi. Okay, so the second game in the Zeitgeist is the same one it's always been, Call of Duty, which exists in the realm of shooters that Counter-Strike has always competed in. When the streamers jumped ship from CS, they all landed around these games. I'm talking COD, PUBG, Tarkov, games without ability spam, and generally realistic military aesthetics. North Americans tend to play the game that their influencers play. So in order for Counter-Strike to come back, we need to turn it back into a game that influencers are interested in. We used to be a community full of streamers and content creators when we had the Zeitgeist back in 2015, so what happened? By the time the 2015 player boom came around, America didn't really have any competitive heritage to speak to. We only had whispers of glory from the 1.6 era. The VP of product development at ESL described North America as a console gaming first community, saying that North America is known as a region where console outstrips PC in terms of revenue and hours of gameplay. Which makes sense, it wasn't until the PC gaming boom of the 2010s did Counter-Strike reach the American mainstream. And contrasting this with Europe, which by 2010 had already been dominated by PC gamers, accounting for 49% of users in our relevant age demographic. Sure, consoles definitely sold in Europe, but take a look at this graph by ISFE. With the exception of the UK, PC dominates. So knowing that, let's take a look at 2016, the last time Counter-Strike had a meaningful spot in the NA mainstream gaming scene. Let's look at some of the biggest influencers playing Counter-Strike at the time. Recognize anyone? Remember why they don't play Counter-Strike anymore? Skins and skin gambling are not ways to cultivate loyal fan bases. The Zeitgeist was driven by money, and monetary incentive is finite. Ultimately, in the 2020s, Americans know that CounterStrike is the pinnacle of competitive gaming, but for a lot of people in the 2010s, CounterStrike just meant dollar signs. A common criticism that I see poised against North American pros is that players took shortcuts to success. We saw this with the match fixing controversies, and we see this with many pros pivoting to streaming as they realized there was more money to be made. Why is it that the NA pro scene could never really get a solid footing in the culture? It's clear that North American players were prone to make choices that prioritized money before competition. So why are these choices so prevalent in NA but not so much by CounterStrike Scandinavian overlords? I think this might be a symptom of American society itself. I mean, take it from a Canadian, living in North America is tough. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You gotta have a certain level of security in your life before you can chase down your best self. In North America, there are less chances. As opposed to Denmark or other states in Western Europe, I think North American players are more likely to choose the easiest routes to attain money as they're concerned with their livelihoods post-CS. Let's contrast this to a place like Scandinavia where social safety nets are put in place to help people get back on their feet if they stumble. Obviously, nowhere on earth is sunshine and daisies. I'm just saying that the societal makeup of somewhere like Scandinavia can encourage someone to, let's be blunt about it, pursue playing video games as a life path. In America, you're likely to make any choice needed to secure your livelihood for the future rather than make choices to achieve your greatest self. That means pivoting from competing to streaming or even taking a dive for cash. In America, a story of someone like Cadian would be near impossible. You know, someone who worked over a decade just under tier 1, only to eventually IGL the best team in the world. Someone like that would have started streaming, gotten banned for match fixing, or began coaching in that time. I think it's a matter of existing in North America, where you're on a teeter-totter, where it's like, okay, I can make something of my life because the opportunity is there, but I can also royally screw it up to a point that is damn near irreparable. And maybe places like the CIS or Brazil, you might as well go all in because the cost of living might be low enough to the point where you could be on a tier 2 or tier 3 salary and get by pretty nicely. So without the strong esports backbone of Brazil or Europe, NA didn't survive the exodus post-skin hype. You can't spell NACS without the words corpo greed. NACS got mismanaged into the grave. By the time COVID led to the death of North American ESL Pro League, we had already seen tournament organizers bow out. It would take a 40-minute video just to cover everything North American teams had done wrong, and we don't have that kind of time, but luckily, there was one team that made every single mistake everybody else made. Let's talk about Evil Geniuses. So from the beginning, EG was bought out by a venture capital firm called Peak 6. It's a clear move. We're hoping that one day esports becomes as big as La Liga or Premier League, so they buy out esports household names in anticipation for the day it becomes as synonymous as Manchester United. Shortly after the acquisition of the team, they buy out the then promising NRG roster and they immediately start seeing success in the 19 and 20 seasons. However, when form wore out and it actually became time to manage the team, shit went sideways and the team underwent various roster changes until they finally left the scene in disgrace in 2024. So what the hell happened? I mean, just mistake and mistake by management. Mistake number 1, overspending on rosters. EG announced that it would sign 2 sister teams called EG Black and EG White. They also had EG Gold, the team for the sisters. That's 20 pro players to one organization. I mean, I could commend the commitment to growing the pro scene by taking on extra teams, but with EG Black being no joke, having names like Stanislaw and Rush play on the roster, one's gotta ask the question, how much money do you actually have to be spending like this? And furthermore, are all of these players getting the attention they need to be at their best? Like, if you need an example, allegedly Cirque and Breezy were making 30k a month way past their expiration date. So if you ask me, EG should have spent less on humans and more on human resources. Okay, mistake number 2. Selling out. One is left thinking, if EG had the monetary constraints that it had before Peak 6's acquisition, would they actually have lasted longer? Would they have made better decisions? Because what I see here is pure incompetence. It's that pretension that old school capitalists place upon quote-unquote new media, thinking that they could kind of change something that is as naturally open as esports. What was tried and true in old media and old entertainment and old sports doesn't apply in the new age. Like, I checked out their portfolio and they have Texas Hold'em for women plus? What does that even mean? Like, these guys are supposed to know what esports is? I don't know, man. Like, in a field where a billionaire like Mark Cuban can loudly say, "It's a money pit," you'd think other people who are less rich than Mark Cuban would actually listen. I mean, EG went in and they installed their own people. In this case, a lady named Nicole Jameson was brought in to be the new CEO of EG. And originally, EG was operating under the assumption that little would change except the work now being conducted with a financial safety net. That's from Richard Lewis's Substack. In the same article, it was also said that there were a few people that tried to explain to Peak 6 that they had concerns about a very corporate company coming in and not understanding esports. And it also says that people tried to be open on day one and say they were worried that they would bring down the company they'd built. Now, yeah, that's exactly what happened, because a little later they'd kicked everybody out. I mean, geez, this is a story as old as time. A douchebag NBA comes in after a buyout, kicks out everyone who knows what they're doing, begins doing things that might work in a traditional business but cannot work at all in the new age of content and competition. I mean, who could have seen this coming? So how do we revive NACS? Knowing how we failed, how do we rebuild? I mean, without changing North America's core issues. EG tried to remake NACS from the top to bottom, which has merit. A thriving pro scene can and will inspire people to join the competition, but that's contingent on success. Had EG kept up their form from their first tournament onwards, perhaps there could have been positive effects, but that didn't happen, so no use wasting breath on it. But seriously, things are looking up. We just gotta rebuild. That means focusing on building the foundation of what creates a long-term and competitive player base. To hark back to the CS2 Silent Killer video, check it out if you haven't yet, we gotta bring back more casual and fun game modes to CS, so we can have a new generation of content creators to create buzz around the game. North America loves its influencers and will pretty much always follow the trend. I mentioned that we also need to stop relying on skins to incentivize players and redirect focus to fun and competition. Well, how do we do that? North Americans have the great privilege of being able to afford good gear and networking capabilities that could have been used to send spaceships to the moon during the Cold War. But this in turn killed the LAN. LAN cafes and LAN events keep games alive by fostering a grassroots environment for games to bond and compete IRL. Esports thrive in a country like Korea because of the culture that third places like LAN cafes can provide. It would be awesome if we could bring back some of those big LAN competitions of yesteryear to rebuild the culture of competition between ourselves. And when we see someone on the world stage, we can be like, yo, I've seen that guy, I'm gonna root for him. I can't speak for the USA, but here in Canada, we got Launders doing the Launders LAN in Toronto, so shout out to him. Hopefully with his recent push, we can start to see more local North American LANs being hosted with enough prize money to warrant NA teams to participate. Some news came out that the Launders LAN will actually be included as a ranked event in the Valve regional ranking. So how does that help NA? So for a few years now, Valve has voiced concerns about franchising, the practice in which tournament organizers can sell permanent slots to certain esports organizations for guaranteed spots in tournaments. This practice is what a lot of people cite as the cause of death for the Overwatch League. Obviously there are other reasons, but I tend to agree with the assessment. So what damage did it do to North America? Well, underperforming teams in North America had the ability to buy out slots in franchise leagues and tournaments. Valve introduced a new rulebook for 2025 that separates the scene into ranked and unranked events. Tournaments with a total compensation of over $100,000 must apply for a ranked license that comes with extra rules. Section 5.1 stresses non-exclusivity and effectively bans the practice of franchising from any tournament running CounterStrike. This might be a sign that we're moving away from the consolidated era of esports and going back to the time that we had multiple tournament organizers. I'm talking DreamHack, ESL, E-League, MLG, Beyond the Summit. I miss when we had the whole gang together. Removing franchising ungatekeeps the pro scene and ensures that only the true best of the best gets to enter the arena. This means that there's more upset potential within the pro scene for strong upstarts. NA-based amateurs would have a greater opportunity to show what they have on the big stage. It's worth mentioning that Texas remained the last bastion for Counter-Strike fans, and in 25 we're actually returning to Austin for the major. Hopefully this, plus the new changes to franchising and the Valve regional ranking, will create more buzz around NACS so that we won't just have 2 calendar dates in Texas, but also return to big hubs like New York. Now, will it actually help the esports scene? Will Corpo rats find a way to skirt new regulation? Well, it's too early to tell, but we'll have to wait and see. But things were better before, and going back to that seems like a better idea. We've also got to take chances on young pros like we did with Stewie. We cannot keep recycling the same pros over and over again, unless it's Stewie. And last but not least, we got to focus on getting the game optimized. While I was making this video, Valve did roll out an update that finally made warm-up server playable for me, so so clearly we're making some progress, which is fantastic. But I'm also thinking about players with PCs less powerful than mine. We don't want to segregate access to Counter-Strike based on specs. I mean, an esport title occupies similar space to that of real sports. The barrier of entry to football is an open space and a ball, right? So we should strive for something similar to CS2, especially considering the game's popularity in places where people might not have space age gear. Unlike CSGO, we don't have the ability to roll back to the title we can run, so I imagine players who aren't running the latest generation of X3D chips in their PCs would rather go play something that runs well than play Counter-Strike poorly. But as I said, we're clearly making steps in the right direction, which makes me far more optimistic about NA's future than the topic we went over in the last video. We got Launders up here in Canada carrying us on his back. We love you, man. Pros in Valorant are starting to express fatigue in the direction the game is going. You know, you see it in tens. And keep pretending you like that game, Tarek. With these new regulations coming in, I think we have a shot at reviving our scene. We just need to push for community content, optimization, and more opportunities for upcoming teams, and let North American players do the rest. So with all that being said, I want to ask, have I missed anything? How would you fix North American CS?
Like and subscribe.
Also check out dupe.fi.